Don't
So
have
I've
to leave.
started the webinar.
Okay.
Let's see if he can find us. We are now, I'm gonna just
Research and advocacy. Thank you, Heba, for being with us today. And then our final expert speaker is Sarah Marceau, and she's an activist and a researcher at Musawa and Alab. And she's also, like I said at the start, co-chair of Working Group 3. Sarah describes herself as a feminist and an anti-racist activist, engaging with the Islamic tradition to promote gender equality and dismantle patriarchy in Muslim context. So at Musawa, she has played a key role in advancing knowledge building efforts, contributing to research, publications, and strategic initiatives that challenge male authority and advocate for egalitarian family laws. And she is a graduate of Sciences Po and the, my French accent, Institut d'études politiques de Lyon. And Sarah is currently leading the Lab's first knowledge building project and developing Musawa's future Center of Learning. Thank you, Sarah, for being our expert speaker and also helping facilitate this session. I'm now going to hand over to Nora, who's the chair of Working Group 3 and who will facilitate further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for these great introductions. Thank you, Virginia, Heba, and Sarah for being our guest speakers. Sarah and I are very excited about this webinar. It's a culmination of a year long full of discussions and conversations and a lot of thinking through communication with faith actors and policymakers. And we're just very excited to bring this all together today. It's been really a journey of learning from each other and sharing knowledge and experiences. I want to just discuss a few working definitions before we dive into our webinar. So the title of our session is Exploring Legitimacy in Addressing Gender-Based Violence, Conversations between Faith Actors and Policymakers. So what do we mean by legitimacy? By that we mean the recognition or the acceptance of someone's authority. So your right to speak or act on an issue. In the context of GBV and religion, this legitimacy can come from different sources. We discussed some of them within our working group. They included gender-sensitive religious teachings, lived experiences, or alignment with legal and human rights frameworks. Then faith actors, we describe those as any individuals or institutions whose work is grounded in religious frameworks, beliefs, or practices. This can include religious leaders, scholars, practitioners, and any member really of any faith-based organization who engages on social or policy issues. Lastly, policymakers. These are any decision makers, any funders, or anyone involved in implementation of projects or influencing public policy, such as government officials, legislators, advisors, development partners, anyone who has any decision-making power in resource allocation and public policy. So these are our three main terms that I thought is important that we just align on those. If you, as we said before, if you have any questions at any point, please use the chat to let us know, and then we'll make sure to answer those questions. All right, I want to give you a very brief overview of what Working Group 3 has been doing. So this working group is all about communication and bridging communication gaps. We of course recognize that the conversation between policy and faith actors doesn't always happen face-to-face, as depicted here. We know sometimes this unfolds over time or through intermediaries or via various different forms of communication. We also understand that policymakers and faith actors aren't always separate categories. Sometimes their responsibilities overlap. Sometimes they share cultural contexts. But we chose to focus on these two groups because they really bring unique strengths and influence to tackling gender-based violence. And we know that it gets very tricky and complicated sometimes when religious arguments enter conversations around gender-based violence. And sometimes the conversations then stop. Sometimes this then gives hands over the stage, if you will, to more gender restrictive voices. So it's very important to keep the conversation going. So what we've been trying to do is to really come up with practical outputs to help bridge those communication gaps between faith actors and policymakers, and to find common ground and build confidence in talking about these issues, to overcome this hesitance, this fear of not having legitimacy to talk about it. And so this working group produced three main outputs. One is a journal article where we captured experiences and voices from the fields of practitioners having to work through these challenges of communication. And we really wanted to highlight these stories. They're so relatable all over the globe. This is a challenge we see pretty much everywhere. Then there's a policy brief containing recommendations for policymakers on how to improve communication with faith actors on GBV. And then lastly, we produced a toolkit that is for both policymakers and faith actors, providing them with step-by-step guidance through a conversation on GBV. So we're very excited to share those with you once they're finished. I will move on to our wonderful panel now. We will have 2 rounds of questions for our 3 speakers. And then after that, there will be time for a discussion and any questions you have. So afterwards, we encourage you to unmute your microphone, ask questions, or write in the chat. And if you didn't get to ask a question, then we will share an email address that you can reach out to, and then hopefully we'll get back to you as soon as possible. All right, so our first question is, in your experience, how have you navigated questions of legitimacy in addressing gender-based violence? So I'll hand over to Virginia to answer that question.
Thanks a lot, Nora. I don't know if you hear me well. I am on my smartphone and hope it works well. I'm very happy to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me. The question is a good one, and also it's a tricky one. So I turned it upside down for a while, if you're trying to find the right angle to address it. So I've been in Brussels, so working for the European Commission since many years. And so I think, fair enough, I would speak from this perspective as part among other policymakers working on gender and trying to bridge out to faith-based actors. I'd also invited colleagues working at country level to share some insights with me. So I will be also their ambassador and will bring to you some of their perspective and point of view. So on how to handle the question, I see 2 aspects. The first one is legitimacy in working with FBO as such. This is still very much, and even more maybe today than yesterday, a delicate issue for us as an international organization. Are we legitimate towards our constituencies to work with faith-based actors? And how we make sure we are consistent with our human rights compliance engagement. And then the second point is about working with faith-based actors on gender-based violence, so more specific on it. So on the first point, we consider FBO as a civil society organization. So formally, they do not have any specific characteristic highlighted in our system. So we, in a way, we do ignore or their faith-based nature when it comes to contracting and to having a formal relationship with them. So we do a lot and we do not know what we do because in our information system, we do not have any possibility to detect and also to learn from good practice or from maybe challenging one. We can do it manually or by, I just say, because we know colleagues and we search, but we do not formally, we do not have a complete overview. What we know is that we are doing really a lot. Now, all grantees, all contractors in our systems are expected to comply with human rights and women's rights. And so now, these days, there are new, I would say, concerns about engaging with faith-based actors and then discovering they might be homophobic or support an anti-criminalizing law on LGBTI issue in Uganda or in other countries. So I see in-house more nervousness and concern about how to handle and navigate. And so challenging, I would say, our own legitimacy to work with them. We are now reboosting some guidance we developed a while ago, trying to navigate this complexity and also guide colleagues to find the right, I would say, direction among two opposite extremes. One being too shy, too afraid and fearful, and so rejecting all contacts with faith-based actors, closing the doors. And the other one, it's being too naive and maybe too enthusiastic and not understanding what's behind it. So we put out some principle of engagement and some criteria. I will skip the principle because otherwise it will be too long, but I will maybe share with you the document if you're interested. When it comes to criteria for engagement, I think it's important to highlight one. The first one, it's about applying all rights. So when we work with a faith-based organization, they should, in a way or another, uphold and commit to all human rights, including women's rights and gender equality. We do not expect them to explicitly agree on or actively work for all of them, but at least they should not speak out or work against them. So this is what we found as a way to be kind of to find a bit of a space in it. The other criteria are about non-discrimination, non-presentation, non-violence, of course. If I have a couple of minutes more, Nora, you tell me if I'm too long. I will speak on what we do with...
briefly, maybe 1 minute, and then thank you, super helpful. I ask colleagues to tell me what's going on now, because things are moving very fast and we see a lot of new tension around. And I got some messages from a delegation, for example, Nigeria. They do a lot on with faith-based action in Nigeria. And the message I got is communication is overall quite respectful and fluid. We feel legitimate in working with them. But communication is not frequent enough to result in change. So there is an issue of regularity and of, we say, really building a system of communication. So it's still too spotty and not regular enough. There are problems, big problems sometimes explode and then create bad waves that long last, as for example, the case of a prominent gospel singer. She was murdered by her husband. She was a very popular figure in Nigeria, Osinaki Nwachukwu, and this created a lot of tension among people saying and accusing the church of not being aware enough of this feminicide coming up. So this is an example of what a delegation bring to me, and I think it's interesting because the colleagues on the ground are confronted with this reality. When this happens, all of a sudden, what you have built through maybe long effort and of engagement is at risk. I can stop here. I can continue. Thank you so much. This has been very, very extremely helpful and really relates to a lot of what we've been talking in this working group of, finding these shared commitments and that is so crucial to have that common grounds going into these conversations. I'll hand over to Heba now, and then we'll hear from Sarah.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you all for such great efforts to gather us from different contexts and different countries to share our experiences. And this is the first step of cooperation to end the gender-based violence. Actually, my experience stems from the idea of raising awareness. The fatwa or the religious context we are dealing with at Dar al-Ifta or in the religious institution in general tries to address the questions we receive from women themselves or from the families themselves. And to much great extent is that the production or the knowledge production contributing to raising awareness for people in the Arabic society or in the Egyptian society, it comes from the experiences that the people themselves are living at home or in the society. So we are mainly working inside and outside Egypt on raising awareness because at Dar al-Ifta we receive questions from every part of the world. For me, myself, I am responsible for receiving questions in English at the English department from women from every part of the world. And the common thing I noticed recently in a recent study I was working on, and hopefully it will be completed in a couple of months, that women in every part of the world share the same fears and are exposed to the same issues. We are sharing the same fears, issues, and due to economic atmosphere, due to the nature of looking and considering women's needs in general. So we're working on raising awareness on the nature of the relation between the two genders or men and women, how to raise your children, especially the male child, to be responsible for male, not to oppress in the name of taking the charge of the woman under your protection. Because in Islam, we have the concept of qawama, or the concept of men are protectors over women. So some societies or some communities misunderstand this concept and consider that the power that Almighty God gave to men is to oppress women and be authoritative over them. And Sarah knows what I'm talking about because we were working with Musawa on researches and meetings relating to this issue. So the very important thing is to raise awareness. Islam as a religion, Christianity or any other religion stands with justice inside the family and then to the society as a whole. And this is what I started from in my initiative, Women's Voice for Peace. It is dedicated to breaking the stereotypes that women in the society are suffering. A girl will finally get married, so she doesn't need education. So it is better stay at home, learning house course, and then go to her husband's house, and then we did our job. This is the stereotype, for example, in the Arab countries. FGM and other issues that women are suffering, we started to raise awareness from the religious text, from the scripture itself, from the Quran and Sunnah, etc. The second part is knowledge production. We have fatwas on the website or the written content that everyone can read or have access to in order to read and learn. I have a special experience in working on an application that Egypt Dar al-Ifta launched a couple of years ago in 2022. And this application is called the Fatwa Bro. Everyone can download the application and send their questions. This actually helped many women inside and outside the Arab world to communicate and reach easily and even share their experience or fears. Even if she doesn't have a certain question, she might share her feeling or doubts. Am I allowed to travel without a male guardian? I have an education or educational chance in a country outside my community. Can I travel? For example, this is one of the issues that we are working on raising awareness at all the time because time has changed. So we are working on coping up with the changes in our world that serve the needs of women and help men as well understand the nature of their responsibility towards women and towards any female under their protection. This is in a nutshell, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. And thank you also for highlighting what a global challenge it is and that women all around the world share, very, very similar fears. That's shocking to hear always when we realize that, but it also is encouraging because we know, we're going through similar things and hopefully can find a solution that works in many contexts. Thank you so much for that. Sarah, I'll hand over to you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nora and Virginia and Heba for sharing with us your insights. I related a lot to what Virginia shared in the beginning, this feeling of walking on eggshells when we engage with faith actors or on religious grounds, and how do we navigate between the two extremes, like you said, Virginia, do we engage with what kind of faith actor do we engage, what are we going to sacrifice in that process, and what we don't want to sacrifice because there are limits? What are the red lines that we don't want to cross in order to be able to host a meaningful conversation? When I thought about the question, and like Virginia, I was struggling about which angle, because this is a big question. It made me think about knowledge and authority. When I think about legitimacy, for me, it's about knowledge and power. Who holds the power to speak about an issue? How is this knowledge produced? And what counts as valid knowledge? Because of course, knowledge and power are intertwined in every sphere and not only in religion. And feminist and decolonial inquiries are often questioned, dismissed for not meeting the standard of so-called good science. But who defined what good science is? Who built the framework, the standards that we are expected to meet? So when we talk about legitimacy and the authority to speak on issues like gender-based violence, what I'm thinking about is what kind of knowledge, what kind of spaces are we able to enter in order to advocate for gender justice? And religious knowledge is no exception here, because it's often shaped by privileged men who center their own experiences and exclude the voices of women, children, and other marginalized groups. When it comes to the Muslim tradition, because this is on what my work is focused in Musawa, God is considered as the ultimate authority. So there is no intermediary between God and us. In the Sunni tradition, there is not even a formal institutional structure of authority, because it's supposed to have no other authoritative center other than God and the Prophet. But after the death of the Prophet, interpretations of the Quran were open, diverse, sometimes even contradictory, and this diversity and this flexibility was celebrated. It was really considered as a blessing, as something positive. Over time, certain scholars became the gatekeepers of knowledge and authority, and today, many Muslims defer blindly to these authorities to regulate every aspect of their lives, even when these dominant interpretations are completely disconnected from the lived realities on the ground. But what happens when these authorities promote harmful or discriminatory norms or discourses, like the one Virginia mentioned in the beginning? What do? Do we remain silent? So for the past 15 years, Musawa questioned and resisted and reclaimed this relationship between the production of knowledge and the practices of power in Muslim context. Because what we believe is that women's lived experiences, and Heba, you really focused on that in your response as well. This lived experience is an important source of knowledge, but it's also a pathway to reclaiming legitimacy and agency. Being silenced, being excluded, dismissed is unfortunately familiar to many of us in many spaces. And that's why in Musawa, it was really important to value non-conventional forms of knowledge, women's stories on the ground, our experiences of harm and injustice, to really counter this idea, the fact that patriarchy deprived many women from access to formal education. And that doesn't mean that these women don't carry knowledge from life and from struggle. And we say that this knowledge, this can be used in order to shape our understanding of religion. But why are we still hesitant? Why is it still so hard to challenge harmful practices when they are justified in God's name or in the name of divine scriptures? Because we're standing against an entire system which claims to be divine and immutable. So, but when I speak against gender-based violence, against marital rape, or against FGM, for example, using Quranic verses, using the prophetic hadith, the prophetic tradition as evidences, it is very powerful, because what I'm saying to this conservative counterpart, I'm saying stop using God to sustain your privileges. Patriarchy is not divine, and God doesn't stand with you. It stands for and with justice. While navigating these issues of authority, legitimacy, and knowledge in Musawa, we've been very much inspired by the Women's Ways of Knowing framework. And these questions about how do we know what we know? How do we determine who is an authority to speak about which issue? And what is in stake when we are excluding certain actors from the production of knowledge and ultimately then reclaiming authority? And these questions are really key to challenging hegemonic notions of legitimacy on both feminist and decolonial grounds. So the question I wanted to ask today is how, to what extent are we able to question, resist, and reject an argument, a source of knowledge, when it stands against our values, when it goes against gender justice? I think we really must stop deferring to established authorities, whether they're religious or secular, without question. In particular, when these entities leave marginalized group, whether it's women or other groups, Virginia mentioned also LGBTQ groups, when these entities leave these groups at the margin, we need to question that. We can't just keep the status quo going on, and we need a paradigm shift. I think that as actors in the struggle against gender-based violence, whether we identify as faith actors or secular actors, our legitimacy comes from our knowledge, from our commitment, and from the evidences we gather, whether these evidences are scientific evidences, empirical evidences, or religious evidences. If someone uses, for example, science or history to justify child marriage practice, you counter them with scientific and historical evidence. When someone uses a divine scripture, a text, a religious argument, you can also respond with faith-based, gender-just interpretation. And this is partly what we do and provide in Musawa. So to wrap up my point is, for me, where do we find legitimacy? Where do we find this courage to speak in knowledge and in lived experience? And I think that when it comes to standing for our rights, when we are fighting against harmful practices, we all have the legitimacy. We all have the legitimacy, and we all have the responsibility to speak, resist, and reclaim these spaces, whether these are religious spaces or other spaces.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you bringing this all together, and it reminds me a little bit of conversations I have with my kids. My kids just said the other day, the moon is made out of cheese, and I had to say, well, where did you hear that? Who told you this? And we never stop learning how to challenge things and think about the source of the knowledge production. So thank you so much for that. We'll move on to our next question. So the second question is, can you share an example of effective communication between policymakers and faith actors, or can you recommend any practices that would improve this communication? I'll hand over to Virginia again.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody, very interesting. Yeah, I was thinking of examples, and I will quote a few programs, not really of communication, but of engagement initiatives. So one of them is really about communication, because I discovered by chance that our colleagues in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, were supporting a radio, which is a Muslim radio, very important one, very powerful. It exists in 20 years. It's one of the main radio in Côte d'Ivoire. It's called Radio Al Bayan. It's funded by a very influential imam, and they do it under the radar in a very discreet way. And through this radio, they really supported many initiatives fighting FGM. There was a political and reputational and ideological risk in getting involved in this initiative, but it went very well, and they were very happy about it. And I mean, through the radio, and it's a confessional one. They managed to really have an impact, and I think the rule that they accepted was that they would have stayed a bit aside, not on the front line. So the capacity to be humble and discreet sometimes is very important for policymakers. I don't know if you ever heard about the Spotlight Initiative, which is a very big program implemented by the UN with EU funding in 26 countries. It's about more than 500 million euros, so it's unprecedented effort. Through this very ambitious program, a lot has been done with faith-based actors in many countries and with different angles and approaches. And I think it's difficult to speak on it for 3 minutes because so much, I don't know which example to choose, but I think maybe for colleagues who are also spoke before, there have been a lot being done, for example, in Latin America, training religious leaders, hundreds of religious leaders, to prevent feminicide and teenager pregnancy. A lot has been done in Malawi for training religious and traditional leaders to become champion of change. And they did annul almost 1,300 child marriage. So this really resulted in something concrete. There's a lot of being done also in Nigeria, in Mali, in Niger, relating to access to service, to communication, to education of boys and men. And I mean, I think there is a lot of good practice. Still, challenges are there. And the Spotlight team, I think, continues to engage while highlighting that engagement is not easy. And that sometimes they really face faith-based organizations that resist the conversation with the project team. Colleagues who are now on the lead implementing programs in many countries, I've noticed, tend to be very cautious about it in these last months because what's going on around the world. And because getting closer to this religious factor is more and more seen as a Western approach, as a form of colonial imposition and as a threat. So I detect there are signs that it's getting more difficult this time. And because it's getting more difficult, I think we should not really abandon it, but it's very important to continue. I think that what you spoke on the beginning, this policy brief and material you are developing, I think it's very important to continue to feed the conversation. And from my experience, I think that it's very important to be able and feel free to adapt the way we speak and our international organization geopolitical jargon, our human rights language should be and could be adapted in order to be more open to delicate and conversations that need to happen. So we have seen it, and I think it's well documented. A word can be a wall. You can use the wrong word and then you really build a wall, and it takes years to pass through it or to rebuild it. So I think it's very important to be careful about our jargon. We see that there are ways of speaking on the same things with different perspective and with different points, and it changes completely the conversation. And I think it's very important to get the energy and the time to invest in a medium-term relationship. So the leadership has a key role in it, because in our system, if the leadership does not support us to engage, to make space and time for it, it will be difficult to happen, because it's not a linear trip. It's complex, and it needs to acknowledge complexity and to go through crisis and rediscover the other. It takes time. So I think for communication, my really advice is to adapt the language and invest in leadership and time.
Thank you so much. That really resonates a lot with what we've been working on in the working group. And just when you highlighted that point about complexity and being comfortable to sit in this complexity and keep going and not abandoning something just because it's, you know, it's complicated, that resonates a lot. And yeah, more time is definitely needed to really get be below the surface. So thank you for the encouraging recommendations that you mentioned. We really appreciate that. I'll hand over to Heba.
Yes, thank you, Virginia, for such coverage. Very informative. Thank you. For me, actually, over the past year, there is a tangible change in seeking women scholars or female scholars to help women who are coming to the institution to address and share their issues. Now we have in the Council of IFTA, or the Council for Issuing Religious Edicts, we have 5 female scholars. And I consider this one of the big changes that happened through the institution. Actually, we were fighting in the past for achieving such a step, which came late, but to come late is, or too late, better than nothing. This is the first thing. The second thing is that we have a certain department in the institution dedicating to monitoring and collecting the issues relating to the violence that women or girls are being exposed inside the family, to meet them. And this is called the Family Issues Department and Raising Awareness. We are giving them courses or training on how to face such humiliating circumstances they might find from the Quran and Sunnah or from the primary texts, with specialized people in different specialization. For example, we have psychiatrists, we have scholars from social sciences. In an initiative and came to the institution to have an integration between the religious institution and the social science itself, because we, to some extent, some people discovered that we are only talking to ourselves. So the goal was to reach out to people and to reach out to the society through such dedicated department, and having female scholars to have some sort of giving those women a chance or more comfortable to share his fears and issues with a female like her. This is one of the big changes that happened in the institution over the past year. Currently, on the personal level, I'm working on a project, and I still don't have whether it can be a podcast or something else, in order to raise awareness on the idea. And by the way, in Egypt right now, in general, we have a big rise in the idea of gender-based violence. And the drama in the TV reflected this over the couple of months, starting in Ramadan, dedicating a whole drama for the idea of silent gender-based violence and how the parents can deal with it in a great TV series. And we are living now a similar incident in Egypt, in one of the Egyptian governorates, where a 6-year-old child has been harassed by an elderly man, and the government today, the court, has decided to send him to a life sentence. So I think there is an integration, there is a concept of we need to speak, and this is what we are telling the people, that you have to speak up. Don't fear the religious institution with you, and also the people in the society will never blame you if you speak. For me, I'm so happy to have such a change in our society. I know that we still have a long road to go, but at least the great fall starts with a drop of water. So I think now we have started many drops of water, to start a change in such things we are facing in the Muslim community. At least we are not longer feeling ashamed or being ashamed from mentioning and treating with such issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. I really feel encouraged about your examples as well, and I've also been following what's happening in Egypt and following the show you mentioned, and I was really moved by how we start talking about these taboo subjects, and it really helps to break down these barriers, and it helps us raise the next generation the way we should have been raised before. So thank you so much for highlighting these points. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Heba and Virginia again. Like I kept connecting the dots between what you've been sharing and the importance, many things, the importance of sustainability, the importance of breaking the taboos, but also being cautious. And I think this is what it was also a common thread in our conversation in the working group this year about how do we navigate this, how can we be cautious but still be able to speak when being cautious doesn't mean freezing. And so it really resonated with me. When I tried to think about your question, Nora, through the work we've been doing with Musawa and of course our advocates and allies, and so we've witnessed many powerful moments of efficient communication between policymakers and faith actors, because this is really la raison d'être of Musawa, to really build bridges between these different actors, but also between scholars and activists. That's why I also really liked what Virginia said about what kind of language do we speak and how do we make ourselves more accessible, because it's also a matter of language. So we had within Musawa's work, we've been working with the UN agencies. We've had capacity building courses to UN staff and different kind of policymakers from cooperation and developmental organization. We've also had roundtables with faith actors in Egypt, in Sudan. We've had small capacity building courses with Sharia court judges in Palestine. So we really engage with different kind of actors, both on the side of policymakers and on the side of faith actors, including female faith actors, because this is also a very important point that Heba, you mentioned, and it was in this framework that I've actually met Heba, who came to one of our capacity building courses with Musawa. And of course, these communications were not all successful. We've had many moments of challenges, and Virginia mentioned it. It's not without risk. I mean, we live also in difficult contexts, in conflict, and we work in difficult contexts where there are wars and economic precarity, and so we're not just having these conversations in a vacuum. There are intersecting factors and intersecting issues that come as well, but although these difficulties, I tend to see these difficult experiences or challenges as opportunities, because we've started the conversation. And I think starting the conversation, planting the seeds is important, and transformative change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you plant a seed and then you come back 10 years later, and this one event you organized, this one scholar or faith actor you've engaged with would have kept that in his mind or in her mind and would do something different in 10 years from now. So I think we really need to be patient in the work that we're doing, and because we don't get results on the spot. So I wanted to share with you one powerful example from Musawa's work with the CEDAW committee and the CEDAW convention. So the CEDAW convention, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this convention on the elimination of all discrimination against women, is one of the most reserved of international human rights treaties. And over the 400 reservations entered against CEDAW, over 60% are based on religion. And the most reserved article is Article 16, which recognizes equality between men and women in marriage and family relation. And that's why Musawa's work has been focusing on this Article 16 and on gender equality in the family. So when solicited by national groups, Musawa submit thematic reports or joint shadow reports, but we also deliver oral statement to the CEDAW committee and participate in lunch briefing with the committee members. And this is where we have engaged in dialogue with the committee members, the CEDAW committee committee members. And over the years, Musawa's engagement with the CEDAW had really a lasting impact, because now CEDAW experts use our language. They use our concepts and good practices, examples from other Muslim majority countries to question the use of religion as an obstacle to gender equality. Because, of course, many governments use religion as a shield to justify discrimination against women or to justify the absence of reform. And in dealing with that in the past, CEDAW experts just freeze because they don't want to engage on these issues on religious ground. And the work we've been doing with them is like to provide them with the language. That's why when you spoke, Virginia, about the language, it was really important for Musawa to provide the language so that you can speak and counter the use of religion to justify discrimination. And so I wanted to share with you two examples. So Musawa published a report on CEDAW and Muslim family laws in which you can find the details of many of our interactions, and I will share it in the chat, but I wanted to share two examples. One is in the review of Mauritania in CEDAW 58, when a CEDAW committee member responded to a government member who used the Sharia, so the Islamic law, to argue against gender equality. And so the CEDAW committee member responded, there is no contradiction between Islam and the rights of women. What you are saying is an interpretation. So this is a CEDAW committee member, a policymaker, who like in the past would have just said nothing because, the religion has been advanced, and now like using the language provided by Musawa's report, they were able to actually counter that and continue the dialogue. Another example is in the review of Gambia in CEDAW 61, when a committee member said, I feel that there is ample scope to look at the Sharia in a more flexible and non-discriminatory way. I, as well as many Muslim majority countries, believe that there is no contradiction between Islam and giving equal rights to women. So you can imagine in your different contexts, and especially those of us who are in Muslim contexts as well, how powerful this can be, that the CEDAW committee member then voice and amplify the voices of activists on the ground and engage with religion in like for advocating for gender equality. So now to respond to the second part very quickly of your question, Nora, so then you can go to the question and answers. How can we strengthen communication between policymakers and faith actors? First, of course, I would recommend using the toolkit that we produced with our working group, because it really offers practical advice for starting meaningful conversation. And we've really tried to gather different perspectives from all of the context of all our working group members. Second, as I mentioned earlier, for me, knowledge is so important. It is really important to empowering ourselves, empowering activists on the ground, empowering faith actors and policymakers with feminist and decolonial tools and methodologies. And for me, this is really crucial because these approaches help us to engage constructively with religious practical discourses. And it also helps us to see where are the gender-sensitive voices that we want to promote, whether these gender-sensitive voices are secular voices or religious voices. I think also we must diversify our advocacy strategies, and this is something Virginia spoke about. I think it's important to be open to exploring different kinds of arguments and evidences, and including religious-based arguments, especially in contexts where religion influences the laws, the policies, and social norms. If the government's representative can use religion or refer to religion in a CEDAW setting, that means that religion is already in the public space. So we need to engage with it, whether you want it or not, you have to engage with it. And so better to identify who are the gender sensitive voices that can be on your side. And my final point that I can't emphasize enough is the importance to build alliances across our differences, because the work we do is so difficult. The work we do is not without risk, and we cannot do this alone. Communication is essential. Virginia and Heba, you mentioned it, but it needs to be sustainable. It's not the only starting point. So I would recommend that we need to invest in building strong relationships that are sustainable. We need to support each other in this and in the face of the rise of conservative discourses and who are now like putting at threat the rights of women and other marginalized groups.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really feel like everyone felt this relief, this sign of relief when you mentioned the example of the CEDAW official pushing back. And that's really the leadership that we're, and the boldness that we're hoping for in our policymakers. Thank you for these encouraging examples. We will move to questions. We don't have that much time, but I guess maybe for one or two questions if they're very concise. I know there was one in the chat from Julia for Sarah, so I'll hand back the floor over to Sarah for that question. I'll read it to you. But I just wanted to also really thank our three speakers for highlighting all of these complexities and giving us some concrete examples and really putting it all into perspective for us. Thank you so much. Julia's question, she asked about if you could say something more about secular voice and traditional voice.
Can you, Julia, expand a little bit more about your question, please?
Julia, do you want to unmute your microphone, or do you prefer typing in the chat? If someone else has a question, please feel free to unmute or just type it in the chat as well. I'm trying to scroll back up to see the context in which she asked the question. Maybe then.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge also one important message from Maria Herrera about the downsides of, that knowledge can also be used to corrupt the message, not to convey it. And of course, this is really important. And that's why, this is the battle of narratives. And that's why you need to be out there. But I definitely agree that, of course, it can be used both ways.
Julia's hand is raised. So Julia, if you maybe can unmute yourself. I don't know. See, you lowered your hand as well. Let me see. Karen Pillay has got her hand up. You can unmute, Karen.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the great insights. I think for me, I like what was said around Malawi because our organization has implemented the project in Malawi, and one of the things we found was that we had a very high efficacy in terms of training for religious leaders and religious and traditional leaders. And I think they, leveraging off this in as entry points into ensuring prevention of GBV is very important. So I think maybe it may be because the model was more acceptable in Malawi, and religious and traditional leaders were more accommodating of the training and wanting to apply and prevent child marriages, like you said. But I'm wondering for other countries, what kind of responses are we going to get? Because we also ran the same trainings in Malawi and in Namibia and Zimbabwe, and the level of responses we got in Malawi was far greater.
Sarah or any of the other speakers, if you want to respond, and then Julia did type her question. And Julia, I can unmute your mic from my side if you want me to. But please, if someone can respond to Karen's question or comment.
Sarah, maybe do you want to just take both questions and then, or because Julia responded in the chat as well. Maybe we'll just give the closing remarks to you before handing over to Lisa.
Yeah, I thought Virginia would respond, or I'm not that familiar with the Malawi context, but I think, yeah. I was also typing to Julia to respond to her question on the chat. I'm sorry. Yeah. So
maybe Sarah, if you can respond to Julia's question.
Yes.
Sorry for putting you on the spot now.
No, it's all right. I was actually typing Julia's response. And then maybe we can go back to your question, Karen. I'm sorry. So yeah, I mean, to address Julia's question, for me, I mean, oftentimes traditions and religions are intertwined. So it's difficult to disentangle, you know, what is the religious voice and what is the traditional voice. It really depends on the context. And similarly, sometimes secular voices are the policymakers, but sometimes policymakers are also religious voices, because in certain contexts, religion influence and I mean is in the spheres of powers. So I wouldn't yeah, it really depends on the context, and these voices can be gathered and can be contradictory, and there can be tensions, and sometimes there can be negotiation. And I think it depends on how you position yourself. Like in Musawa, we position ourselves as an activist. So the idea is, what is our goal? You know, we want to end a harmful practice. We want to advance gender equality. So we would actually go and address any voice that can be on our side. If the argument or the obstacle comes from religious voices or traditional voice, then we're going to try to find how can we speak their language. Yeah. In the end, it comes back to what Virginia was saying in the beginning. We need to speak their language. We need to communicate, otherwise there is no movement. So if you want to make change, you need to communicate. And these voices, they're not necessarily antagonistic. Sometimes they're both the same, and sometimes they're not. And I think that's the work that we have to do each in our context, to understand these voices. It's part of actually empowering ourselves and having the knowledge. It's not just about the evidences, it's also about knowing who are the different actors and where are the sites of power situated. I hope
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that was really good. Just because of time, we have to wrap up now. So I hand over to Lisa. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that.
Nora, I can add something to Sarah's response, please.
Lisa, is that okay?
Eba, it's okay if you can take just a minute, because we committed to just an hour, but please do respond if you can, but if you can keep it short, please.
No, it just a very important that the world right now is very interested in the idea of interfaith dialogue. So I think the idea of dividing things into secular and the traditional, we are working on working together other than being divided into different sects or different groups or whatsoever. So I think this will help also in eliminating the idea of gender-based violence upon working on a big umbrella, fostering the interfaith dialogue. I'm talking about my own experience. So I would like to share, if we have the luck to share with you in upcoming events, we can talk about it in details. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. And thank you to Virginia and Sarah as well, just for sharing your insight. I've been following the chat quite a bit while you were sharing, and I can really see how your experiences and your words have really resonated with all of us. So thank you for that. But also thank you for everyone attending, for what you shared in the chat. Again, you know, important links, experiences you've had, you know, just exchanging contact information. It was kind of amazing to follow the chat at the same time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Nora for facilitating, for organizing, and to Working Group 3, to all of you and all of the members of the Working Group, just for the amazing work that you've been doing. I want to flag that Working Group 3 is in the process of finalizing a toolkit, a policy brief, and a journal article. Nora did say this at the start. So please make sure that you are registered as a COP member to ensure that you receive the links once these outputs are made available. And you will also, because you attended the webinar, you will also receive the link to the recording of this webinar, but we also share it with, you'll get it in the next few days, but we also share it with all COP members, and it will also be made available on SVRI's website. But for now, let's wrap it up. Thank you everyone for joining, and it's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.